Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Wall Street Journal's David Wessel.
Well, thank you very much. You know, I feel like I should be clapping for you because this is clearly the hardcore budget deficit crowd. And I want you to know that Pete Peterson told me personally that when the deal is done, everybody who's in the room at the end of the day will get a $1,000 voucher from the Peterson Foundation towards your share of the cost of deficit reduction. I'm very pleased to have a group of people here today to do what President Clinton asked, to put people together who disagree so we can have some conversation about what divides us and maybe what unites us. And so why don't they come out? I have Alan Viard from the American Enterprise Institute, Joe Minarik, who's representing the Bipartisan Policy Center. He's with the Committee for Economic Development. Michael Ettlinger, who's with the Center for American Progress. John Irons of the Economic Policy Institute. Stuart Butler of the Heritage Foundation. And Zach Kolodin from the Roosevelt Campus Network. So I also want to warn you that there's one guy in the audience, if he's still here, who is playing budget bingo. And he's got, you know, one of those grids. And so if somebody says, kick the can down the road, you check moral obligation to our children, you check that off. So if somebody stands up and yells bingo, you know, you'll see who he is. I think that the most interesting thing to me about these 6 plans was how different they were. And we're going to put some slides up to try and give you some idea of how different they are. The first one here shows the federal debt level in 2035 under the various plans. The 2 left bars are, of course, the various baselines. And you can see they come to different places. The next slide, please, shows federal revenues as a percentage of GDP. This doesn't look like a big difference, but every percentage point of GDP is about $150 billion. So that's a lot of money, those differences. And finally, on spending, you can see the same differences. We have the spending chart. So you can see heritage on one extreme and EPI at the other. That's a big difference. So I think that one thing, and I'd like to start with this, is that this really isn't, and I think Paul Ryan said this, only about numbers. It's about a vision of America and a vision of our government, small business, small government, or big government. And I think it's hard to really get your arms around what exactly that means. So what I've asked each of the 6 panelists to start with is to describe one element, a significant element of his or her plan that's novel or different than everybody else's. We don't need to sit here and talk about how Medicare is driving the budget deficit. We've established that. And the charts show us that Heritage obviously sees a smaller government than, say, the Economic Policy Institute. So maybe I can start with you in the end. Tell us, Zach, sorry. You know, as you notice here, the Peterson people have taken this bipartisan thing a little too far. So these people are in order of alphabetical. But in my mind, they're kind of grouped right to left, so they've completely blown my thing. So Zach, briefly, and I've asked each of the people to be brief, and we're going to keep this panel to half an hour so you can get to the cocktail hour or whatever follows. Zach?
Sure. David really has threatened us to keep it brief. We really focused on the root causes of the long-term deficit. So I think one of the things that most distinguishes our plan is that we recognize that something that CBO doesn't really take all that seriously is the possibility of future recession or future financial sector collapse that we just experienced. And millennials have really internalized this. So we try and stabilize, make secure the financial sector by ending too big to fail through the tax system. Rather than relying on regulators that can be influenced by big business, we simply say if you are too big to fail, 200 billion or more, you're going to get taxed at a rate that you really would rather not be taxed at. And we don't expect to collect any revenue. It doesn't change our CBO projection at all. But we feel that we can sleep much more secure knowing that our big banks are not going to drag the rest of the country down with us.
Stuart, what one thing in your plan is the most?
Well, I think it's basically what we do in the area of Social Security and Medicare together, the vision that we have. Today we have a system that means that there are people at the low end of the income level that are either bankrupted by medical costs if they're elderly, or actually have to go on welfare if they don't have a big enough Social Security check. At the same time, you have very affluent people who are getting benefits they don't really need. We fundamentally transform those two programs to make sure that they are really, they give real security to everybody who needs it, and we actually reduce benefits for rich people because we feel they don't need it. And that allows us to balance the budget and to hit those numbers without increasing taxes. So it's that transformation of the entitlement programs that we know are the core of the problem into, as somebody said earlier, we designed so that it looks like it was done on purpose to actually achieve real economic security and not just windfall benefits for people who don't really need it.
Thank you. Alan? Oh, I'm sorry. Good, Michael.
No. Try again.
John. It's been a long day.
Well, it's been a long day for, I think, a lot of us, sitting through a whole day of budget discussions. So thank you for staying around. I'd like to highlight kind of the investment component of our plan. I think we started from two positions. One position being that this budget exercise is not simply about balancing the budget. It's about doing the things we want to do as a nation. And so we approach it from that perspective. It's purely about balancing the budget. You can do that to make the numbers add up. But this is more about expressing priorities. The second thing we wanted to realize was that we have an ongoing economic crisis. We have a jobs crisis. And so we create additional investments in a number of areas. And let me just highlight a couple. When you look
How about one?
I'll highlight a couple. I would say three, but we'll compromise on two. On education spending, if you look at early childhood education, we know that there are enormous returns. Research has shown that you get between $6 for every dollar you spend on early childhood education, between $6 and between $13. So we know there's huge returns there. We know on areas like healthcare that there's enormous returns to some of the investments you can make there on comparative effectiveness research, health IT. And so these are areas where you can invest today and reduce costs in the long run, grow the economy in the long run. And so that's the central focus of our plan.
Thank you. Michael?
I think the thing about our plan that's unique is that we completely balance the budget without socking it to the middle class. And we do that, and we're still able to enhance the investments we make in the economy along the lines of what John described, although our magnitude is somewhat lower. And we also do it while maintaining health care for the elderly and without going to levels of taxation on the wealthy that are irresponsible. And I think we are the only plan that can accurately be described as doing all those things.
Joe?
The Bipartisan Policy Center's approach was to get together representatives from both political parties. So it is unique in the sense that it did attempt to find a middle ground. Probably in that effort, one of the most important elements of the plan was the proposal for income tax reform. It's different from what I see elsewhere in these proposals, follows the model of what was done in 1986, and we think has potentially the opportunity to bring the two sides together in something they both could accept that would increase revenues and reduce tax rates and therefore improve competitiveness and be attractive to the two political parties.
Okay, finally, Alan?
I think the most distinctive feature that we have in our plan is probably on the tax side. We've taken two goals that many people think are incompatible. One is the goal to tax consumption instead of income, and thereby remove the tax penalties on saving and investment that impede economic growth. And the second goal is to have progressive taxation, and we've combined those by scrapping the individual income tax, the corporate income tax, and estate and gift taxes, replacing all of them in total with a progressive consumption tax based on the Bradford X tax developed by the late David Bradford. And so it really is a way to promote both growth while preserving progressivity.
I see. Okay, let me ask you all to raise your hand. Do you think that between today and the 2012 election, we will have a significant agreement on deficit reduction? Yes or no? Do you think yes? Raise your hand. God, one optimist. And how about in the audience? How many people think we'll have a significant agreement, not implemented, but an agreement to do it before the 2012 election?
We want to know what significant is.
Yeah,
it's in the eye of the beholder. So raise your hand so we can see them, all right? And how many people think not? So it's about 50-50 in the audience and stuff. I mean, we're talking about an exercise here where they allowed you to define what fiscal sustainability is. So I think I'm on safe ground. All right, now Stuart made an interesting observation. if someone on the left had said it, someone on the right would have accused him of class warfare, I think. You said that in the process of this proposal you had, and I think in some of these proposals in general, it wasn't just about reducing the deficit. I think we all understand that's a means to an end, not an end in of itself. But you described that it should also be done in a way that protects the poor and takes something from the rich. It ought to be progressive, right? Is that what do you think that's a criteria we ought to make that's important?
I think there can be agreement that among us all, that it's very important to make sure that there is real security for people who are poor and for people who suddenly come into some problem, say catastrophic health problems, for example. There's agreement on that. We take the view at Heritage that once you start going above that, you've got to start asking what should government actually do. And I don't think, and Heritage doesn't think, that the purpose of the federal government is to give large amounts of money to people who actually don't need it. And it is much better to have a government that is of the size that Americans have traditionally said they want and are prepared to pay for, and not give money from the government to people who don't actually need it. And to be honest, I would think that that is something that the progressives should also be supporting.
Is there anybody that wants to take the other side on that, or is that one where there's some unanimity? Yeah?
Yeah, well, I just have a comment, which is that when you look at programs in our country that are really targeted at the poor, like say TANF, or in our budget we focus on Indian communities and ramping up that investment, those are programs that people feel really comfortable cutting. And this is the kind of thing that when state budgets get smaller, people get wiped off the Medicaid rolls. People get pushed off of temporary assistance for needy families. I actually don't think low-income families can feel secure under that kind of regime. And so I think that that's something that we need to have an honest conversation. I think it's very rude, right, to say that we might expect low-income families to not actually get the benefits that they're promised, but that's our experience.
See, Alan, do you think that the tax system that comes out of your proposal would be more progressive than today's? Or is that not one of your
I don't think it's more progressive. I think it probably roughly matches the degree of progressivity that exists today. And we haven't done a formal distributional analysis on it. I think that you could modify the X-tax structure, take the basic structure and adjust the rates, just as you would adjust a dial, to reach a desired level of progressivity. So if you want it to be more progressive than today, the rates can be adjusted to do that while still having no tax penalty on saving and investment, still preserving its fundamental economic advantage.
Okay, so Michael said something I think was quite provocative. You boasted that your plan protected the middle class. So I want to know, why is that an objective? We have a huge middle class in our country. If they're not going to pay taxes or have their benefits denied, then either the people and someone at the top or the bottom is going to feel the pain. Why shouldn't the middle class be part of paying this bill?
Well, I didn't say the middle class weren't going to pay taxes. We're not increasing their taxes, and I think there's a very good reason for that. You know, if you look at the past 30 years, the middle class has hardly benefited with any economic income growth, whereas the richest people in this country's income growth has been huge. And so I think when we're talking about addressing this problem, you have to look at where the money is, and you have to look at who's, you know, I mean, I'm all for, that people keep talking about distributing the pain fairly. Well, by this measure, the middle class doesn't really need any more pain. And I think that the right place to look to get revenue, additional revenues, is in fact
And does that apply to your benefit, changes to benefits and spending? You also would protect the middle class?
Right, we do our, you know, yes.
So it's all being done at the top tier?
Well, but no, I mean, I don't think I think there are reforms that can be done that actually don't hurt anybody. I mean, I think we all think that about a lot of what we do, you know, in areas like healthcare and you know, other areas where we have to bring down expenses, but we don't necessarily think that means inflicting pain. We think there are things that just aren't working well.